son. Bit by bit, the older that we get, the faster it tick, 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 ticks. Time flies. Whoa, whoa, time flies.
All right, thank you, Dennis Beck, for that song, Time Flies, written by Dennis Beck and friends several years ago. And as I mentioned before, be sure and check out his collection on YouTube. He's got a lot of good songs, many of them relating to his childhood here in Marshfield, Missouri. So today we've got Nicholas W. Inman. Nicholas, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Not to be confused with the founder of Nixa, right?
That's right. Completely different.
We may want to hear a little bit about that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So Nicholas, as most of y'all know, is pretty much involved in a lot of different things. And so I thought today I'd invite him on and talk a little bit about his background and history in our community. But before we do that, specifically, I wanted him to talk about an event coming up in November that's new. It's the first time we've done it here in Marshfield, a Veterans Day event. And so, Nicholas, why don't you tell us about that? I think it's really important, and I wholeheartedly support this endeavor.
Having a Veterans Day parade on Veterans Day this year at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The lineup will be at 1 o'clock. The parade route will follow the same route as the Christmas parade, kind of lining up near the Baptist Association on Washington Street, going around the square, coming off at Marshfield Machinery, and we hope that everybody will participate. You know, anybody that wants to show support for veterans, if you're a church that has veterans in your congregation or a civic organization, I think all of us should show up and support it. And in recent years, we've never done anything like this, and so it's going to be kind of a break from tradition, but hopefully beginning a new tradition, and it's going to be really exciting. And so then after the parade, we'll come here to the Marshfield Community Center and have a Veterans Fair, where many organizations will be set up. So if you're a veteran or a veteran spouse or family member, you can learn about services that are provided for veterans, and maybe can even sign up for a few things. So that'll go until the evening, and will allow people an opportunity to come through. And the parade's going to be exciting. We have troops from Fort Leonard Wood that are going to come and march in the parade and do cadence.
Have some bands.
Yeah, well, the Kilties band from Springfield, from Central, will be participating, and I think it's going to be a really nice parade. And we've been working on it for over a year now. It's been a whole hodgepodge of community members that have been working on it, and I think it's going to be a nice tribute.
Mm-hmm. That's good. So it'll be a little bit shorter than the 4th. You're going to line up at the Baptist Association
near Pine in Washington.
Okay.
Yes.
Just so everybody knows that. And then the parade's at 2 o'clock.
Lineups
Lineup's at 1.
And they can pre-register with the chamber.
Right. So if the parade lasts, say, until 3, then everyone can come to the community center gym here.
Yes.
Will these booths be set up prior to the parade?
No, it'll open afterwards.
Okay, just want to make sure everybody understands that. And then that'll go up into the evening.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. Appreciate the efforts. Is this a new organization? Is this part of your Cherry Festival group?
No, it's its own organization.
Okay.
There are several veterans here in town that are involved in it. The chamber's been involved in it. It's going to be really a nice collaboration.
And how many other Veterans Day parades are there in the area? Do you know?
I know there's one at Buffalo.
And
there's another one in Branson, and maybe Republic. I'm not for sure.
Have one.
I'm not positive about that, but there are several others. And one reason we're having ours in the afternoon is not to compete with some of the early morning parades.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. We cannot do too much to recognize veterans. There's no too much to do.
Your dad would have enjoyed the Veterans Parade.
Yes, he would have. He would have been right there riding a float or
leading one,
driving the Jeep or doing something. So that's one of his big events that he always looked forward to.
Mm-hmm.
And appreciated him being able to do that for all those years. Okay, well, that's great. And this year, Veterans Day, the 11th, actually is on a Saturday?
It is.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, and Veterans Day is still one of the holidays that we still celebrate on the day of.
Yes,
we don't do Mondays, right?
Which, of course, began as Armistice Day.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So now will the school do their program on Friday, probably?
That's my assumption. I'm not positive about that.
Right.
But
so it'll be a big weekend.
It will be.
Yeah.
It will be.
Well, that's good. I know Branson has a big weekend
They
down
do.
there, and
They
Tony
do.
Orlando usually comes back
Yes.
for that and that kind of thing. Good. Well, okay. So all of you put that on your calendars, and I'm sure you can contact Nicholas. Is there some other members you'd like to mention in
Yeah,
case?
Rachel Andrews, Tammy Robinson.
Rachel's at the chamber office
That's
down on
right.
Hubble now.
Phil Rippey, who's with the post there on Jackson
VFW
Street,
post.
the VFW post. Chuck Cooksey. We have a really good group. Louise Hanson.
Okay.
There's a great group of several organizations coming together.
Louise's brother was
Yes.
killed in Vietnam.
That's correct. Yes.
You know, we honored that group a few years ago at
Yes.
Reunion Fest, and that plaque, I mentioned it before on this program, is hanging in the courthouse vestibule on the east side next to the World War One plaque of all the World War One Webster Countyans that served, not necessarily gave their lives, but served. And then this plaque has I believe it's 8 veterans from not just Marshfield, but actually Webster County on that plaque that gave their life in Vietnam. So, and I know Louise's brother was one of them.
Yeah, it's a very personal thing for a lot. And David Hartwell is also on that committee, and I know he and Louise were in the same class together. It's nice to see people that have strong roots together working together. We're talking about maybe next year trying to get the traveling wall, the Vietnam traveling wall.
Right.
We just started having that discussion, and I hope maybe that'll happen because people certainly like Louise and her family have strong connections to that, and a lot of people may never get to travel to Washington to get to see that. So I hope it'll take place.
Was that wall here once before?
I'm not positive.
There was some monument that was here, I think, on the courthouse or something
Not
once.
for sure.
I believe. All right. Well, thank you, Nicholas, for spearheading that and the committee members that are helping with that. So let's just take a few minutes and talk a little bit about you and your history in Marshfield, because that's what this show is about. It's about connections to our community, people getting to know those connections, getting to know the history of various individuals, especially individuals that have supported the community over the years. And so start with the beginning. Your mother, and where you were raised and so forth. Just kind of give us a little bit of a short bio about you.
We moved to Marshfield in the middle of my kindergarten year from Seymour, and we lived on Maple Street at that time. And it's interesting now to live just down the street from where you first began your venture in town, but that seems like a lifetime ago. I guess it probably hasn't been as long as it feels, but little did I know in moving here from Seymour that Marshfield would become such a big part of who I am. And you know, there's, as any of us, there are opportunities throughout life to go other places and live other places, but Marshfield's always been very special to me and has been good to me, and so that's why I decided to stay here, to raise my family here. So, of course, graduated from Marshfield High School in 2000.
2000, okay.
Went to junior high in this building, which is kind of fun to be sitting in the old counseling office for this interview. Worked for you at Walmart, of course, for many years. And then,
should we talk about that a minute?
Sure, go ahead.
So that was about 98?
It was the week after Landon was born, your son.
Okay, well that was that was 2000, March of 2000.
Yeah.
So okay.
And I graduated in May of that year.
Yeah. So how old were you then?
I would have been 18.
18 then. Okay. So
because Landon's birthday's in March, right?
Right, March 10th.
Yeah, day before mine.
So I had a couple of kids working there, that really good people and good young people, and of course Nicholas had written the Fordland Times. You had the Fordland Times newspaper, and you were sort of a little bit of a mover and shaker in Fordland, Missouri at the time. Not that there were too many that were. You were one of the few. And I think your grandmother probably shook you a little bit and moved you around a little bit.
My grandparents lived there. I'd spend summers there.
Right.
Things of that nature.
Right. And then when you come to Marshfield School, what else did you do in school? I mean...
Oh, wow. I was in choir.
Yeah.
I was in lots of lots of clubs in school. Was real active in school.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you, for whatever reason, you sort of were kind of like a 60-year-old guy in a teenage body.
I guess that's
what people would say.
That's true.
Sort of the Michael J. Fox character in Family Ties.
Yeah, I guess that's true. And I came into Walmart with my grandmother one day. We were selling ads for the Webster County Opry program,
Webster County Opry. That's right. That's the event that you
which
were
I
pushing.
hosted for many years at Rogersville,
Right.
which was a monthly music show. And you said to me during that visit, "Why don't you come to work at Walmart?" And I jokingly said the only thing I could ever do was be people greeter. And I think
You didn't want to run a register.
I didn't want to run a register. So about a week later, I think it was, you called me and said, "Were you serious about being people greeter?" I said, "Well, okay." And so I was there 9 years.
Yeah, that's quite
It was the best job in the world. Get paid to talk to people. And at that particular season in Walmart history, you know, with you as manager, we were very involved in the community. And so that opened up lots of doors for me that still, I think, affect who I am today.
Well, you're probably right. You know, I was going to say with these kids that I had working for me, and I asked him, I said, you know, tell me about this Inman kid. I said, you know, he's got the Webster County Opry and he wrote a newspaper. I said, would he make a good associate? They said, oh yeah, he'd make a great associate. And that's kind of what started that conversation. Yeah, it was, you did a good job door
it was,
you know, most people expected to see, you know, a retired guy and or gal. And so
I was met with that a lot.
Yes. So that began your official working career, where you drew a paycheck beyond selling a newspaper or something.
Well, and before that, my actual first job was driving Lyman Mooney.
Was that before that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Mooney had mentored me in 4th grade, and he was volunteering at the Methodist Church. I was going to the Methodist Church daycare. I was really sick in the 4th grade, and he helped me get caught up on my work. And so that began a friendship. And so years later, his son-in-law, you know, Tom Jaco, General Jaco, called and asked if I'd come out to Mr. Mooney's home, that they needed to talk to me. And I was kind of puzzled by what that would be. And so I went out there, and he said, Mr. Mooney is in need of someone to drive him. And so...
you were still in high school.
And that went on for several years. And so I would take him, you know, to the grocery store, to Webco to see his wife.
Right.
And things of that nature. And so that was all kind of around the same time frame.
Mr. Mooney, again, we talk about history, was the longtime music teacher, and before that, the band director, I guess right before Mr. Lewis. Here at Marshfield, and was a very well-respected gentleman in the community, taught piano lessons to people.
Did a little bit of everything.
Had a big had a whole section of land out here, the Hubble Fruit Farm, which again connects back to the Hubble family, which I guess would have been Edwin's grandfather farm. And where Hubble first, I think, went out with a telescope to see the stars. And later we lived there. You know, we purchased Mr. Mooney's farm from his family, and anyways, that was all kind of the same time frame. And Mr. Mooney, you know, started the school orchestra, did boys and girls glee. I think your parents might have been involved in some of that. They did.
He could still
walk. I don't know, Bert Rice. Let's see.
I think he came after Mr.
I'd have to
Mooney.
look at the retrospects, but I think they had Mr. Mooney for something.
Yeah, I think they did.
Dad was in band. He played the trumpet.
Mr. Mooney could walk down the halls of Webco and point at people and say, she sang in girls' glee, or he played the viola or whatever, and he purchased a lot of those instruments out of his own pocket. And he always said one of his greatest regrets was that the school orchestra disbanded, because he felt like we lost a level of culture and exposure to that kind of music in our community.
Another victim of progress, right?
True.
Not all progress isn't always good.
Mr. Mooney was a great mentor. You know, he was singing in the church choir when he was in his 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And I would have to go and pick him up. And if he had a solo, I'd have to come 2 hours early, and we would vocalize for 2 hours. And he still had the pitch pipe from when he was in college.
Really?
And we would lay in his recliners and stretch out and vocalize. And he would give me homework assignments. He'd give me books to read and say, next week when you come to pick me up, I'm going to quiz you about that.
So you got some free vocal lessons.
Yeah.
More or less.
I'd go to pick him up sometimes, and he wouldn't answer the door, and he'd have the door locked. You could see him, and he'd be listening to Pavarotti so loud that the windows were vibrating, and he couldn't hear you at the door.
He was almost 90 then.
Yeah, he loved music and he loved to learn. And
Yeah.
the last book he gave me was on Clara Booth Luce. And he said, I want you to read this and I'm going to quiz you. And then he had to move to Texas before we were able to finish that. But in his Christmas card that year, he said, don't think I haven't forgotten to ask you about this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Always the teacher. So
he was a great man. Yeah,
so that was a special job that combined with Walmart, and here we are.
Absolutely. So you graduated from high school, and then you were still with Walmart for, like you said, several
For 9
more
years. And when I left Walmart, I went to work full time at the newspaper, at the Marshfield Mail.
So that's what I was going to ask you. You didn't do any writing until after Walmart?
Well, I always wrote columns, things of that nature, but didn't become a full time reporter until I left Walmart.
Okay.
And then worked at that. And while I was working there, we purchased Kindle Store, the business at Olga, which was the store that I had grown up doing most of our grocery shopping in, which was kind of fun.
Did your folks live out that direction?
My grandparents had a farm out there, and then in the 90s bought their home in Fordland.
I see.
And still had both of those for many years, but primarily lived in town. But I went to church at Dogwood, which was not far from Olga, because my great-grandparents lived there, so my family was rooted out in that community. So I had gone out actually as a newspaper assignment to write the history of Kindle Store, and Mrs. Kindle's grandson, Sammy Kindle, said this would make a good project for a young couple.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, it probably would. And he said, no, I mean you and your wife. And I never thought about being in the store business.
You'd already married by then. Yeah.
Yep. So I went back and spoke to Sarah about it, and she thought I was crazy. And next thing I know,
she's right.
Yeah, that's true.
We already knew that.
In July of 2009, we went in the grocery store business.
Yeah.
So I was at the paper doing that at the same time, and then left the newspaper to be in ministry full time. So been doing that ever since.
The Kindle Store has been kind of revived again.
Yeah, we're really excited about that.
Activity there, and I've
the Vines family has opened it.
Who is it?
The Vines family, Rick Vines.
Okay.
And they've done a
Are they
wonderful
locals
job
around there?
Yes.
Okay.
And his wife, Rick Vines' wife, was Dr. Schultz's daughter from Fordland.
Okay.
So they're well rooted over in that community. And Rick Vines was a customer that we would see sometimes at the store. So throughout the history of the store, there's only been 4 owners, which is kind of neat.
So did you sell to someone and then?
Yeah, we sold to Charlie Brindley.
Okay.
And he had grown up in that community, and he's an author that lives over there. And then he sold. Actually, no, he closed.
Yeah.
And after he closed, it was closed until the Vines.
He owned it still, probably, and then sold.
Well, the Kindle family still owns the actual building.
I see.
It was just the business that we sold.
Okay. Well, I saw. I know the Historical Society went over there.
Yeah. And we went over there for that.
Did you? And there's been on Facebook, folks from Springfield that go down.
Oh yeah,
there.
they've been having dinner once a month.
Yeah, it's becoming a what's the word? A nostalgic endeavor to go there, and
it's fun to
relive the days gone by. It's sort of like the Turner story.
Yeah, sure. It's fun to take our kids over there. Reagan, our oldest daughter, who's 15 now, grew up learning to walk in the store and helping sack groceries as a little girl. So she has some memories of that, and it's fun to take her, or my grandmother used to stay with Mrs. Kindle a great deal in the store, so it's kind of fun.
So now let's talk about the Dickey house.
Okay.
So you guys had the opportunity to purchase it then. What year?
3 or 4 years ago now, I guess.
So I've got a story about the Dickey house that you probably haven't heard. So my mom, it's a girl, they lived on Maple Street on down the road there. And of course there were 6 kids, but they would walk to school. They would walk to the Methodist church for Sunday school. She and her sister June, Phoebe was a little younger, but probably later on did too. But but then Grandma and Grandpa Roast would pick them up at the Methodist church after Sunday school to take them to Ebenezer for church. So, so she was a member of Ebenezer and grew up in the Ebenezer church for church, but very frequently, for many years as a youth, attended Sunday school at Marshfield. And but on the way walking by the Dickey house, which was a everyday event, at some point, and I can't tell you when, you may know by the history of it, but it had got grown up. It was a spooky place. When did Mrs. Dickey pass away?
1969, I believe.
Okay, but did she still live there that whole
She
time?
lived there until she died,
Okay.
yes.
Well, it evidently got a little, wasn't as well kept, or maybe it was kept, but Mom would say that it was always old wives' tales, legends, things about it that was kind of spooky.
Sure.
You know? And
Sure, as a little kid, it would be.
yeah, I mean, it appeared
Sure.
to be, you know, I'm sure they had, I don't know what the stories were, but I remember she told me that.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that they did on Maple Street is she was a caretaker for Mrs. Lilly, Frank Lilly, and I believe his wife was Sylvia.
Uh-huh.
And they lived down there on the corner of Maple and White Oak on the west side. And she would, as a teenage girl or junior high age girl, she would go and help Mrs. Lilly in the house and help her clean, do things, you know, just as a helper, as a young person. So those are just a couple of stories from Maple Street that and the Dickey house that Mom had talked to me.
And talking about your mother and her family attending Sunday school at the Methodist Church, I remember your Uncle Donald having a conversation with Presley Brzee about how Presley was their Sunday school teacher.
That's right.
And I think he might have even given him a little Bible or something that is in Don's possession.
Jim would have been a youth there with those, with the, you know, with our
I can remember that conversation. Well, when we first moved to Marshfield, as I said, we lived on Maple Street, and we were renting from Alan Conrad in the duplex across from the greenhouse. And
not the Conrad Hilton that I tore down.
No.
Remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. Yes, and the house where your mother had lived, the Price family was living there at the time. But anyways, we were there for a while, and the Frasers were our next door neighbors, Mike and Kim Fraser at that time, and their little kids. So anyways, not long after we moved there, the Dickey house had an open house. It had gone on the market. So we went to the open house, my mom and I, and the line was clear almost to the Price's house, people waiting to get in the house. And so that would have been late 80s, maybe.
Some of the nuns owned it.
I'm not for sure who owned it then, but eventually Bill and Dorothy Bustian purchased it, of course, restored it. And then we had a family event in the house not long after they had restored it. And then, you know, we've just kept connected with it. But as a little boy, I said to Dorothy Bustian, someday I'm going to live in this house.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, you better start saving your pennies. So after we purchased the house, Dorothy was the first person that I called. She lives in California now. And she was so excited to, you know, she remembered that story. So to have seen the house through different evolutions of time, it's kind of fun.
Absolutely.
You had closed the porch, didn't you? The side porch downstairs?
Yes, the back porch there. We made this the sunroom or whatever. It was, let me think for a minute. No, actually, they had a hot tub in there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
They had a hot tub in there. And I think we didn't do the original enclosure. They had that done when they had the hot tub put in. What I did was, my guys we took the hot tub out. We had to take the windows out to get it out.
I see.
And then we converted it and made it into the little dining banquet room. Built the steps and cut the window. See, there wasn't a doorway into the living room there.
Yes,
that was a window.
Right.
And we cut that window in, made a door, and then the stairs coming down. And
we had a wedding in there yesterday. That makes a great backdrop.
Yeah.
So see, you had a special part of the history.
Well, and then
of that
I also
too.
painted one summer. I painted a lot of the outside of the house. Years and years ago.
I didn't realize that.
Who were the owners?
The Stevens?
Stevens,
Larry Michael Stevens.
Yeah.
They were there, I think, 22 years.
Yeah.
And the house was going to sell to an assisted living facility. And like the day of or close
the one
to.
That went over on North Pine Street?
I'm not for sure, but they were going to tear out the main staircase and put in an elevator. And either the day of or very close to, the sale fell through. And
Stevens were going to sell it to them? Oh.
And so we had communications back and forth with the Stevens and Sarah and I about whether we were interested in the house. And so when the sale fell through, I said to Sarah, I really think we need to be serious about this, because what would that do to the history of that house?
That was an omen, wasn't it?
Yes. And so I felt that it was very important. And, you know, much like yourself, loving history, it made me sick to think the Dickey house was going to be anything but what it's supposed to be. So,
you know, that was a Sears Kit house.
I've been told that.
Yeah, and those were very popular. They would ship them in on trains, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, that one was right by the railroad.
It's very interesting to hear everybody's stories connected to the house.
And all that really means is
Yeah.
Was it 1909 or something like
1908.
1908?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you
just
got
purchased
in
it.
a Sears catalog and you ordered it and mailed it off, and they would ship you all the lumber would be cut to length, instructions on how to assemble it, and it was it was a great thought, great program, great plan. You know,
the original house set on the Maple Street side that they lived in until this house was completed.
Okay.
And some of the money to purchase the building of the house came from the big case involving, Stanley Ketchel, the prize fighter, and Mr. Dickey was involved in that.
Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, and so that's where a lot of his, I think he was a prominent businessman to begin with, but that certainly helped in the process.
Yeah.
And Mr. Dickey had grown up in his very youthful years in Kentucky, and I think he really wanted a house that mirrored some of the things from his childhood memories. And that was kind of an antebellum look, really, even though it was
Southern,
many years removed from the Civil War. That was an important thing for him.
So that was Sam Dickey.
Mm-hmm.
Was he John Dickey's
grandfather?
Okay, that just
Miss
passed
Dickey,
away.
Miss Ella Dickey's father. Yeah, and he was.
But Ella was John's aunt.
That's correct.
Because Ella didn't have children.
That's correct. Okay. John's father was Miss Dickey, Miss Ella Dickey's brother. Yeah.
And did he ever live in the house?
I think maybe he did. I think it was the sister who didn't live in the house.
Okay. But he went on and
he was an attorney in Springfield.
Springfield?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that Sam Dick Jr. or a different?
No, it was Charles.
Charles Dickey.
Yeah, and then John Dickey had a brother named Sam.
That's okay.
Yeah. We were grandson to.
But John went to England then.
He was between New York and England, and he had quite a legal career. And he had great stories about that.
I was getting ready to say, I'm sure you spent some time learning about that.
And I knew John before we bought the house because John would always send, I guess I can tell this now that he's deceased, he used to send flowers every year for Miss Dickey on Halloween for the library and to the Historical Society and into her grave.
Oh, okay.
And I would go and take pictures of those and email them to him so he knew that they'd been delivered.
Sure.
And we communicated like that for years. And I had written a lot about Miss Dickey for the paper. Every Halloween, usually we would do something about Miss Dickey.
And why was Halloween significant?
Because Miss Dickey loved Halloween, and she would have a haunted house in the house.
That's probably why Mom.
Probably that could very well be. And you'd start in the basement and work your way through. And when you got to the top, there's kind of a balcony area.
That's it. See, I knew there had to be something there. Yeah.
And Old Bloody Tom, which was this hunchback character, would throw you out on the landing onto some kind of a mattress, and kids thought that was great fun.
Mm-hmm.
So Miss Dickey's flowers were always signed OBT for Old Bloody Tom. And so John and I would communicate about that. Then when he purchased the house next to the Marshfield Mill, the Fian home, as they were painting it, I would send him pictures of the progress and things. And so we were communicating for a long time. And so I was very excited. And I think he was, because I'd always kind of been fascinated with Miss Dickey.
Yeah.
I think she'd have been great fun for a kid.
Mm-hmm.
Lucille Fian used to tell great stories about Miss Dickey, and she would say, she might call you up in the morning and say, come as you are. And all these prominent women in town would show up in their curlers and their nightgowns for some breakfast that she'd served, or she would take women out.
Was she in curlers, though?
I don't know. But Lucille would tell these stories. And she told me one time they all went on a picnic on the James River.
That might have been the Do Nothing Club that Pat Abbott's mother was a member of.
It could very well been.
Mrs. Lane was a member of the Do Nothing Club. All those sisterhood groups had, names.
Sure.
And they didn't have all the things we have to do today. So they would get together. And
she said that one time her son, Lucille's son, Miss Dickey had given him a pair of overalls with all the things that little boys would like in the pockets, like, plastic worms and stuff. And he thought that was great. I think she'd have been great fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Sure, a well-educated lady. If she was the librarian, she probably read more than all the rest of us put together.
And when you consider her whole life really was in that block, from church across the street to walking to the library. I mean, her whole world was at her fingertips, and she never went very far from where she started.
Yeah.
And people staying with her allowed her to stay in the house until close to her passing away. She
Right.
actually passed away at Burge Hospital in
I remember
Springfield.
her.
Do you?
Yeah, I do.
And I think Aline Hurst lived with her
Mhm.
for several years and made that possible. And when you're in that big house, I used to think, how could she not want to live in this big old house? But, climbing 2 or 3 flights of
Right.
stairs when you were her age, there had to
There
be some
wasn't a
wonderful
bedroom on the
memories.
first floor either, was there?
No, so
Yeah.
the downstairs room, which we now use as the TV room, I think they would
made a
kind of
bedroom,
partition the house off to hold
Yeah.
the heat.
Yeah.
She stayed there, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. Interesting. Glad you have it, and you've kept it alive and
Well, I think that's
continue
important.
yeah, it absolutely is important. That's what we're trying to do here, as you
Mhm.
know. Tell me about Laura Ingalls Wilder and your position over there as a director. Just kind of fill us in on a little bit about what you do and that organization.
When I was in the 3rd grade, Carol Stopak was my 3rd grade teacher, and she read to us on the banks of Plum Creek, and that just fascinated me. And so I always had an interest in Mrs. Wilder's life, and my grandmother would take me to special events over there. So many years later, I became friends with Gene Cody, who was longtime director and president of the Wilder Association. And Mrs. Cody would attend the Cherry Blossom Festival and things of that nature. So at some point in time, she asked if I would join the board of directors over there, and I did. And eventually, as Mrs. Cody was getting older, she felt that she needed an assistant director. So I was hired as assistant director. And then when Mrs. Cody passed away in 2018, I became director. And it's a wonderful job to preserve history. And, I feel special because or feel fortunate, I guess I should say, because I've known each of the directors before me from attending special events over there. I'm the 4th director. And to have known the people that have been in that position and to have worked with Mrs. Cody, who had been there, she'd been involved in the association since the 1960s.
Right.
So it's interesting. People from all over the world visit there, and you don't often think about that.
Right.
But Mrs. Wilder's largest fan base comes from Japan. And after the Second World War, General MacArthur sent her books to the children of Japan to teach them about westward expansion in our country. So there are huge fan clubs over there. And her life, of course, was eventually turned into the television show
Right.
Little House on the Prairie. So you see younger fans, and this next year will be the 50th anniversary of the show. So it'll be a big year. But people, it's kind of a special moment when they finally get to visit the Wilder
Right.
home.
The TV show, would it be safe to say the TV show really kind of put Laura Ingalls Wilder on the map for the general public? Although she would have been extremely popular as a writer and for her book collections, prior to that. I mean, especially with maybe your your grandmother's generation, my mom's generation.
Sure. I think
Something like that. But it seems like I think that's something that we've talked a lot about here in Marshfield, even with Edmund Hubble or with Route 66 or the things that we have claim to fame to. Edmund Hubble, beyond being the greatest astronomer of the 20th century, maybe the greatest astronomer since Galileo, based on what he discovered and what he taught humanity about our universe. But we've really never capitalized on that. I mean, however, had there been a television show or a movie, a great blockbuster movie like has been written about many people that probably weren't as impactful to the history of our nation, actually, our universe, I think it could make a big difference in the interest beyond, Marshfield or those that know.
A lot of people walk through the doors of the Wilder home who only know Mrs. Wilder from Little House on the Prairie. And of course, most of that was fictionalized, didn't follow the books.
Sure.
But they walk through the door because of that quite often. And then we are able to teach them about the truth, about the real story of Laura Ingalls Wilder. So it's been a great tool for us. And I think there's kind of a bridge. You have purists who are fans of the books, and then you have people that are fans of the show. But I think there's a very healthy connection between the two that has been wonderful for us.
But you supported my point in stating that there is a large segment that come because of
Oh
this
yeah,
television
of course,
show. And,
of course.
And then if you want to go even further, what if Michael Landon hadn't have been Pa Ingalls?
Yeah, right.
What
Sure.
if some character actor that, maybe a great actor, but didn't have the name that he had coming off
Right.
Bonanza? So all those things have to play an important part of kind of building an image or building
I agree.
The whole marketing of someone like that.
Well, and I think you look at Mark Twain, a famous Missouri author. We all know the name Mark Twain. Have a lot of people in today's society read Mark Twain's work? I don't know. But if there had been a television show about the life, much like they took some of his stories and made movies,
Well, there's been
Huckleberry
lots of
Finn,
movies
yes.
about Mark
But if there had been something just specifically about his life, maybe you'd be able to sit here and quote from me from his books more than you could. And I think the television show has certainly helped. And in the heyday of the show, we still welcome 30 to 40,000 visitors every year to the Wilder home.
Amazing, Mansfield.
Yes, when you consider that Mrs. Wilder's been deceased since the late 1950s, and she still receives fan mail. I answer fan mail all the time from little kids that think that she's still alive. But if in the heyday of the show, the numbers that were visiting Mansfield were, double that.
Then again, if you think about it, the fact that she was a children's writer.
Yes.
So those stories that were embedded in their minds as young children, just as a sitcom was embedded in our minds, whether it was the Brady Bunch or Bonanza or whatever.
It became part of our culture.
Yeah, it becomes part of our culture as we're growing up, and we're very influenced, and it's very impactful on us.
And we also preserve the life story of her daughter, Rose Wilder Lane, who at one time was more famous than her, was a great writer. Surpassed her mother in fame at one point in time. And she kind of gets overlooked so much more now by Mrs. Wilder. But Rose lived a fascinating life, and we are stewards of a lot of her life stuff.
Now, Laura Ingalls Wilder was not born in Mansfield, but she lived her later days.
She lived the longest period of time that she lived anywhere at Mansfield, wrote all of her books there. She's buried there. Mansfield was home the longest
now the
time.
Little House on the Prairie was based in Wisconsin? Walnut Grove, Wisconsin?
Walnut Grove, Minnesota.
Okay, yeah.
And so, there are sites all over the nation where Mrs. Wilder lived for different periods of times of her life. And there's quite a relationship between all of our sites.
I see.
But
what brought her to Mansfield, Missouri?
Well, there was lots of opportunity in Mansfield. There were the apples, and there were many opportunities and land. And
her husband or something?
They learned about it and decided, they wanted to come that direction.
Okay.
So they and some of their friends they headed to Mansfield. And when she arrived there,
About what era or decade would that have been?
Well, it'll soon be 125 years. I guess
it'd be around the turn of the century.
Yeah, late 1800s is when they arrived.
Okay.
And she loved it there. She fell in love with the people. She loved the culture. The environment, everything.
Yeah. So she still lived there 50 years or so.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and she was an active part of the civic life of Mansfield, and there are still a lot of people. Not as many as there used to be, but there are still people who have direct stories of they remember her and.
Right.
Until recently, we had an employee that knew Mrs. Wilder, and it's fun to hear personal stories.
So that's probably one of the big differences in why, Mansfield was able to embrace her, because she lived there with them. Whereas
she was one of them.
Edwin Hubble was just here as a child, and then
that makes a difference.
By the time he became an adult, he didn't even come back here. He could have, but not much anyway. So. That makes a difference, but
it does.
But the point I was making is we should be capitalizing more on that.
Oh,
for tourism.
I agree, 100%.
A museum. We should possibly get NASA involved. There's all kinds of opportunities out there if we just knew how to get them.
When we lived on the Hubble Fruit Farm, people that really knew Hubble's story would occasionally stop and want to take pictures in the yard. And although Hubble didn't live in the house that Mr. Mooney built, they wanted to have some connection to the property.
Was there an old house there in that area?
I think there was one not too far from where we were living, but they wanted to just be connected to this. Had belonged to the Hubble.
Right.
And I think people are always wanting to see where Hubble was born. Of course, it's no longer there.
On 3rd Street.
Yes, on 3rd Street. They just want to feel some kind of connection and beyond the telescope. It amazes me, and you may have heard these stories as commissioner, how people would come in off the highway and think they were going to be able to see the galaxy from our replica.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But it was still a brilliant move by Mr. Buskin,
Yes,
whose
right.
idea it was to
Yep.
have the replica made.
I can remember William Earhart was the person that went down inside the telescope and was tightening the screws because Bill couldn't fit down in there, you know. And occasionally I'll say something to William about that. But
Right.
yeah, people.
But see, it took a guy coming in here that had lived his entire life in California, and he buys the Dickey house and gets involved in the chamber and the community. It's like
He did a lot for Marshfield.
Realize you have Edmund Hubble was born here. Oh yeah, I've heard that. Yeah,
right.
And it was like he really kind of made everybody think, oh wow,
Bill Buston did a lot for Marshfield. Really,
yeah.
He saved the Dickey house.
Yeah, he did.
He at that time helped open the chamber office, which was no longer there now, but it was behind what is now Taco Bell.
Right.
He made sure there was signage on the highway that advertised the telescope, built the telescope. He did a lot of stuff.
Which all probably helped his business, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure it did. I'm sure it did.
Wow, we only got 15 minutes left. It goes fast, doesn't it?
It does.
It really does. So we'll just touch a little bit more on, are you still involved in Wilson Creek?
Yeah. I serve on the Wilsons Creek National Battlefield Board.
On the board, okay. Tell us just a little bit about that.
Well, most national parks, have a foundation that is the fundraising arm of the park. And so Wilsons Creek has such a foundation, and they work year round to raise money we've purchased artifacts and things that the government's not able to go out and purchase outright. So we've also helped work on the acquisition of more land that made up the original battlefield, because when Congress actually laid out what they were going to acknowledge as the battlefield, there was a lot of the battlefield that didn't get encompassed into that plan. So we work on things like that all the time, and it's another way of preserving history that is fascinating to me. And there's a great group of historians or people interested in history that work together on the foundation. And our longtime directors have retired, and we've just hired a new director, Melissa Adler, and she's doing a great job. But I've been really excited about being involved with them.
Yeah. Is she kin to Paul?
I'm not for sure.
What he on KY3? I think.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know.
So you guys meet
We meet monthly.
Monthly, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what's their big event?
Well, we have
reenactments.
Well, we have had reenactments as fundraisers. We haven't done one in a long time, but we always do something around the history of the battle, which is in August.
Okay.
We have a dinner, and that's usually a fundraising dinner associated with that. We have a luncheon during the Cherry Blossom Festival. We do several events through the year that are fundraisers for us. Okay. But the main amount of money that we raise, of course, come from those fundraisers and from our memberships. People are members of the foundation.
Sure.
So, yeah.
What other organizations are you part of besides the Cherry Blossom Festival? We'll talk about that too. But anything else that you're involved in that maybe people don't know or do, and you might want to touch upon just a minute?
Well, I feel kind of strange being involved in two chambers, but I'm president of the Mansfield Chamber and have been for several years now. And then I've just been reelected to the Marshfield Chamber Board, which you have a history with as well. Several organizations like that. But the Cherry Blossom Festival takes up a good portion of my civic time.
Sure.
Because it takes all year to plan it.
Sure. So how many years now?
This will be the 19th festival.
19th festival. And tell us a little bit about what you've got going, like what's this next year, what's the future hold, what's your views or vision for down the road?
I would like to see someday that we branch out. Not the idea was when the festival started, Marshfield had the 4th of July mastered, and we had something for harvest days, but we had nothing in the spring. And